Welcome back to Specter of Torment. Last time we went through the Clockwork Tower, and we were able to recruit Tinker Knight into the Order of No Quarter, and we also had a boss fight with Reize, who is now forced into obedience by the Enchantress. So now he's the one who handles the Dark Mirror instead of the Dark Acolyte, and kind of like the Dark Acolyte, he has information on the various knights, though it's not as cheery, let's say, as the Acolyte's was. I also changed my armor. Instead of the Raiment of Risk, we now have the Charger's Shawl, which I used for the boss fight with Reize. Mostly because we don't really have to worry about darkness anymore. I have a full darkness meter now, so I can spam the curios pretty much as often as I could with, say, the Raiment of Risk at only 3 or 4 chunks of darkness. And also I think the Charger's Shawl is probably a more fair armor than the Raiment of Risk, because you actually have to take time to charge your attacks in order for them to do more damage. And also you can perform charged dash slashes, but it's not as spammable as the Raiment of Risk, where you can pretty much do a ton of ground slashes and take out many of the enemies in a very short amount of time. It's not my favorite armor in the game. That probably is going to be the Raiment of Risk, but it's the one I use most often because I think it makes the game a bit more challenging than the Raiment of Risk, I guess. The Raiment of Risk was a bit too broken. I wanted to talk about Reize for a little bit. I don't dislike Reize. I like him, as I like the other original characters that the developers for a day were able to make for this game. I enjoy all of them. But I just think I enjoy Reize the least because he's kind of, I don't want to say generic, but it's like, that's pretty much what it is. He's kind of generic, I feel. All of the other characters have these cool, I don't want to say quirks, I guess like themes to them that I haven't really seen before. They're all very interesting to me. Except for the Phantom Striker, but then the Phantom Striker kind of gets bumped up because I just think he's a cool character. For Reize, he's not that cool. He's a nice character, but I just don't think he's... There's nothing that really puts him above the other ones, I guess. He did get bumped up a little bit through this campaign, which is kind of a trend. He got bumped up thanks to Plague of Shadows with that tentacles joke. And now he's getting bumped up because he's essentially a member of the Enchantress's crew now. And he has this dark, edgy, DeviantArt color variant, even though he was already a kind of DeviantArt character. Whatever, alright. I just want to say I don't dislike Reize. As for the stage itself, the, I guess, gimmick of this stage is that there's a bunch of knights and a bunch of just walls and stuff that have balls and chains attached to them. And they're basically a new obstacle to avoid. You can slash at the ball and chain, whether it's being held by the wall or a knight, and it will cause it to go back in the opposite direction. And sometimes you might not want to do that because you can knock it back into you, which I actually have done a couple of times. You can also just avoid it, which is the thing that I find myself doing most often. And of course, with the knights, you can kill them, and that'll basically make the ball and chain go away. There are some new enemies, and actually some enemies that I forgot to talk about before. I guess we'll talk about the ones that I forgot to talk about. The Dark Beetle, which is basically a faster beetle. It kind of hops around, it's a bit more sporadic. They don't drop any money, as I recall, and unlike the original beetles, where you can bounce them up into the air and juggle them around, These ones immediately die after you hit them, so they don't really have a use in platforming. They're just cannon fodder pretty much, and they only give you darkness. Then there's these new dark wizards. The wizards, rather than sending out projectiles that go straight in front of them, instead send out a skull kind of projectile that you can dash slash onto. So they can be used for platforming pretty much, and they take less hits than the regular wizards. Usually they all take 3, but these dark ones take 2 instead. Though they go down pretty much as quickly as the other wizards do, so it's not that big of a deal. Also, the gold armors that are holding the balls and chains, rather than taking 5 hits, they only take 3. Which I guess makes sense, because they're not supposed to be as defensive. They don't have shields to block attacks from certain angles or anything like that. They just have their ball and chain. And the different colors, I don't think they note any differences between them. Actually, scratch that. I think the normal colored ones, the red and gold ones, will kind of try to track you, whereas these silver and gold ones will instead, oh, well, nope, I'm wrong. They both just walk around in place until they bump into something and then they start walking away from it. Although the red one did not turn around when he started walking away from me, so maybe I was right with my previous thing where the red ones will actually attempt to attack you. A curio that we got last time that I didn't make much use of, was it last time? Maybe it was. The barrier lantern, which we also upgraded. Now it has purple flames, and rather than at full charge sending out a sort of cluster bomb type thing, it instead sends out 5 fireballs, and each of the fireballs is slightly homing, so you can get 5 hits on some enemies. Though I still don't find myself using it that much. Dread Talon is still the way to go for me, but I did show it off at least in this part earlier, so you can't say that I didn't, I guess. Another new gimmick in this stage is those books. Now, rather than having just horizontal platforms for you to run on, they have vertical platforms that you can use for wall climbing and such. Though it's not really much of a big difference, it's still essentially the same gimmick, just having temporary platforms that you can use to get across gaps and stuff like that. We're pretty much at the end of the stage now. We just have to take on this griffin or whatever the heck it's called, and it's gonna go down pretty quickly. Something that I really don't like about this stage, mostly because of New Game Plus, is that at the end of the stage they don't give you any food besides that bird that you kill, who usually drops food, though in New Game Plus it drops a bomb, so you might be heading to the boss fight with less than optimal health, we'll say. As for the boss himself, King Knight, of course, one of the easier knights of the Order of No Quarter, though he has some snazzy new attacks that he added to his repertoire. For example, when he ground pounds, he will shift the floor. Rather than being a flat floor, it's now a bunch of columns, and that does mean that you can fall into a bottomless pit in this fight. If King Knight himself falls into a bottomless pit, one of those flying rats, I guess we'll call them, will carry him up into the air, and he can send cards down at you to attack you. He can also summon some flying rats from the top of the screen, or summon cards, which will fall down, stop in midair, and then an arrow will appear next to them that shows what direction they're going to go in, and basically you have to dodge that, though you can slash at the cards themselves in order to get them out of your way. Overall, still not a hard boss fight, but it is made slightly harder than in the original 2 versions of the fight. I'm gonna get rid of this fairy because I am tired of it crying, and I don't know. It was just a distracting thing for me. I have no idea why. Here's a new character in the tower. This is Gal, or Gal. I don't know what the name is supposed to be. But Gal basically practices his or her kiss of death on you, where you make out for a sec and one of you dies, though for some reason Gal is the one that dies here. Maybe it's because Specter Knight's already dead? Well, that's actually not true, because Gal is dead, as he or she said. They are now double dead because they did the kiss of death wrong. Is that supposed to be a pun on like the kiss of life? Like CPR or whatever? I don't know. We got a new curio. This is the Shadow Mirror. It's kind of like a curio that Shovel Knight has. Actually, the amiibo version of Shovel Knight specifically. Because with the Switch and Wii U versions, you can use the amiibo to make a custom knight. And that custom knight has like 20 some relics that he can use, all of them pretty different from each other, and one of them is very similar to this, where you summon a shadow copy in front of you, and if you press the attack button, then the shadow copy will attack. Though for Shovel Knight, for some reason he didn't attack, he just like sent his hand out, and then the copy attacked. I don't know, it's kind of weird. And also with that curio, having the shadow out does not drain any of your darkness. It's slashing with the shadow that drains your darkness, so you can technically have it out for an indefinite amount of time. The upgraded version makes the reflection go farther, and it'll also pick up items for you. It also changes the color of the reflection, making it look more like the color scheme of the Charger's shawl, rather than the original armor. You can perform a charge slash with the reflection out, though the charge slash for the reflection doesn't actually do any more damage, it just has more range. And this gold armor that we've been helping out isn't actually a gold armor. He's a dragon. And you might recognize this portrait from somewhere, or rather, that base from somewhere, because it was on a portrait. This person was one of the backers for the Kickstarter campaign, and thus they got their face in the Hall of Champions in, you know, Shovel Knight's and Plague Knight's campaign. The Hall of Champions isn't in Specter of Torment, which I guess is a little lame, but it's not that big of a deal, in my opinion. I don't really mind not having as many extra stages with Specter Knight. Also, there was a gold armor back near the buffet table where King Knight was. He gave you some extra money. It wasn't all that much, so I didn't really feel the need to mention it when it happened. Now we're actually in Mole Knight's stage, the Sunken City, as I recall. And the new gimmick is apparent right from the get-go. We now have goo blocks, a new variant on the block types, and these blocks, when you jump on them, will bounce you high into the air. When you slash at them from the side, they will bounce you backwards in the direction that basically you're coming from. It's kind of a cool gimmick, though it can get a little bit annoying because you might knock yourself back into, say, a pit or something like that, which can cost you a life. Not that that's happened to me too often. I think it might have happened once or twice, but that's it. Sometimes these goo blocks will have the birders, I think that's what those energy falcons are called. They'll have birders encased inside of them. What I like to do in that case is use the Dread Talon on the goo block. If you're far enough away, just the shockwave will hit the block and you won't get knocked back at all. And if you're close to it, doesn't really matter, you'll get knocked back a little bit, and basically you'll kill the birder as soon as he comes out of the block. So it's really the most useful way to get rid of that obstacle. Having to deal with a birder and the goo blocks would be kind of a pain, in my opinion. There's also a new enemy in this stage that is kind of a fusion of two previous enemies. It's very similar to the gold armor that had the ball and chain. It's one of those shield knights, I guess you could call them, with a birder attached to them that basically functions like the ball and chain, except it doesn't go through walls. Instead, it'll bounce off of any wall or floor it touches. Depending on which one you kill first, the other will act on its own, as it did when it was on its own previously. If you kill the birder first, then the knight will take his shield out and start running around. And if you kill the knight first, then the birder will detach from the chain and start flying around everywhere. I would recommend using the Dread Talon to take out the birder first, because the knights are a lot easier to handle, in my opinion. Another gimmick in this stage is the goo lanterns. They're basically new versions of the original lanterns. So you slash at them with a dash slash, and rather than going in the direction of the gash that was in, of the reticle pretty much, you'll get bounced back in the opposite direction. So say you were going up right toward the lantern. Once you hit it, you'll be going up left away from the lantern. A pretty interesting gimmick. I think this might be my favorite set of gimmicks for a stage. I really like Mole Knight stage in Specter of Torment. And they also use these fish, or lava fish, I don't know what to call them. Basically they're reduced to targets now, and you can kill them, unlike with Shovel Knight, where if you shovel dropped onto them, then you wouldn't actually kill them, you would just bounce off of them, essentially. They do respawn very quickly, so it's not that big of a deal if you do kill them. You can get back to wherever you were previously after following that chain of them. This part right here can get really annoying if you don't use the Dread Talon, because if you just break that goo block, you can get knocked back by that birder and basically fall onto some blocks that are about to explode underneath your feet. This is another difficult section right here, because if you get hit by any of the fire, then you'll get knocked back. And if you get knocked back, that basically counts as you falling. And the thing with dust blocks is you'll fall right through them as Specter Knight, so you don't want to get hit at all here. Specter Knight, of course, shares the gimmick of making the lava geysers, I guess, into goo versions of themselves. But unlike the other characters, he could wall run up the goo geysers in order to make some progress. And also you can goo up the lanterns themselves in order to make it so that they turn to the goo lanterns and you could bounce off of them. It's only for a limited time that the lanterns stay their gooey versions, so you need to be quick when it comes to bouncing off of them. That was a neat little section right there, where you have to goo up one of the lanterns while it's moving on that conveyor belt. And once it's all gooed, you have to follow it and wait for the perfect moment in order to bounce off of it and head to the ladder. That is what I really like about Specter of Torment. There's a lot of do or die, I guess, platforming sequences where you have to be very precise. And I like having precision in my platforming games, I guess. I mean, who wouldn't like precision in their platforming games, really? It's basically the point you want to have, because you don't want to fall into a bottomless pit or anything like that of, a fault that isn't your own. But this red skull right here, if you're playing with the cheat that allows you to basically wall jump as Mega Man X, or say Samus from Super Metroid, where you only need one wall to bounce up, you are pretty hard pressed to get that skull, because the game will make you jump off of that wall in order to get some height. You can't just run up walls anymore. And jumping off of a wall means, well, jumping off of those walls specifically means making them explode and having the trail go along. So what you really want to have is the curio that we're going to be getting in the next stage in order to get that red skull with that cheat on. But I don't have the cheat on, so it's not that big of a deal for me. Though it was kind of baffling when I originally played with that cheat on. Anyway, enough of that tangent. Here's Mall Knight. Still one of the easier knights in my opinion, as I said with King Knight. He'll dash around, going into and coming out of the walls. After a couple of dashes, he will hit the ground and start causing sparks on the ground, and those sparks will damage you. I tried to do this fight using only curios, but I started off with a Dread Talon, even though I wanted to use the throwing sickle first. So I ended up screwing up on this boss fight a lot. And eventually I did start using the actual scythe. Mall Knight's new gimmick is that he will cover himself in the goo and also create goo platforms on the floor which you will bounce off of if you step on them. Rather than just dashing across the screen left to right, he will also dash vertically from the ceiling to the floor and vice versa. And if he's in his goo form, when he starts sliding on the ground, rather than just sliding, he will actually bounce around. Also, if he hits one of the goo splotches on the floor, he will also start bouncing around. Though, if he does miss another one, he will start sliding again. A very interesting take on the boss, in my opinion. And this stage in general. You're basically putting goo onto things that didn't have goo before to make new gimmicks. And the boss's new gimmick is that he covers himself in goo. I think it's a pretty neat idea. Now we have another one of these flashback sequence stages. And at the beginning of the stage, this stage specifically, if you didn't get the caltrops from the first flashback stage, Lewin will give them to you and basically say, hey, you missed this relic last stage. Take it. And Donovan makes some comment like, oh, I don't see what this scrap metal has anything to do with, you know, our mission right now, but whatever, I'll use him. And because I have max darkness meter in the actual campaign, well, that's kind of a weird thing to call it, this is part of the campaign. Because I have max darkness in the future, I have 100 item right now, so I can pretty much use caltrops as much as I want. And they are pretty useful. The last stage acted as a kind of tutorial for them if you did have them. And in this stage, there's a lot of situations where they're made useful by positioning yourself correctly and stuff like that. Though the randomness of the caltrops does kind of get in the way a little bit. I think I might have mentioned this before, but the caltrops do kind of bounce around erratically when you throw them. So they might bounce toward you, they might bounce away from you, and they might bounce and stay in the same place. It's kind of annoying because you have to waste some caltrops in order to get them in the correct position. But it's not too much of a big deal. You can just go gung-ho in this stage and hit everything with your sword. And that one almost fell off. I'm trying to set up two so that he'll basically run into both of them without me having to put in much work. And I tried to do the same with this guy over here, but I think I kind of screwed up on activating him. And the caltrops do disappear after a little while. I was hoping to get him with that first one, to knock him into the second one and then kill him like that, but it didn't quite work out, though it didn't need to, because he ended up dying anyway. Another thing about the caltrops that I might not have mentioned is that you can slash at them in order to bounce them away from you, and you can kind of juggle them around, though I don't think they act as dash slash targets, so there's not much reason to juggle them except for moving them around into better positions. You can't use them as any sort of platforming tool. And there's the amulet. The thing that Donovan and Lewin were searching for. And as you can see, I can still give the cold shoulder, even in this flashback sequence. And here's Shield Knight, a unique boss to this flashback sequence. I think that's a really cool touch that they gave a Shield Knight boss fight to Donovan here. And it's a boss that we basically haven't fought before. I mean, we did fight spoilers, but that's not exactly Shield Knight. I think it's really cool that they did this. As for strategies against Shield Knight, she blocks attacks from the front, so you need to wait for her to throw her shield away, or you need to attack her from behind in order to do any damage. The best times to attack her are when she throws the shield from a corner and while on the ground, because when she does that, she will basically stand still until the shield comes back to her, allowing you to get a good few free hits in. She'll also ram into the sides of the screen, and if she does so, then the blocks above you will start to fall down. And occasionally they will give magic pots when they fall down, so you can restore your caltrops if you need to. And Donovan, being the untrustworthy man that he is, doesn't believe in Shield Knights and decides to attack Lewin. A very interesting twist, I guess, for Specter Knight here. But that's pretty much all the time we have for today. So next time we're going to be going for more knights in the order of no quarter.